comprenderlo, tío. Hoy la mierda, todas están ahí que hay que comprender, que es un día especial.
Y ya estamos otra vez
Sí.
online, chavales. Con la otra parte. Ahí está Sandy Gardiner.
Hombre, ya tocaba que salía Sandy, ¿eh?
Yes, Eric told me to get out here because he is busy with the Star Citizen birthday cake and other things. So I am going to announce the next panel, which is the
Che, qué piernacas tiene,
facial
Cuidado,
animation technology. And I would like to bring up on stage Ivo Herzeg and Andreas Rohr.
Están lindos. Sí, sí.
¡Madre!
A ver qué anuncio. Vamos a centrarnos, venga.
Sí, sí.
Yo quiero la cámara, tío. Te digo la verdad, ¿eh?
A ver, dejadnos escuchar, chicos.
Okay.
And all this didn't happen overnight. It took actually almost 3 years.
Vale. Está diciendo que lo que vamos a ver ahora no pasó ayer noche, sino que les llevó 3 años hacerlo.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and even in the office we are sometimes not really sure what all this means. So I hope we can put a lot of things into context in the next 50 minutes, and the best way to do that is to go for the material in chronological order. And I hope
pues este tío es muy paradito, Dice que va a ir en orden cronológico, enseñando todo. Utiliza el reproductor de Windows.
In 2015, we did everything with traditional methods.
Pausa.
And that means everything was animated in Maya, and then we baked the result into an animation file. And that's okay if you have only a simple cutscene. The problem.
Vale, está hablando de que la animación facial no hay problema si solo utilizas una escena simple. El tema está en si quieres utilizar ese tipo de tecnología para dentro del juego, que eso es otro rollo.
So we used this system before when we worked on other games. And I think it's a pretty good workflow for pre-rendered cutscenes. And it's still okay if you want to use it in-game for a couple of unique characters. But it's absolutely not practical if you have a game with lots of interactive situations and where every character has a different face. The amount of data you need to duplicate is absolutely insane. So it was clear for Squadron and for Star Citizen we had to find a different solution.
Están hablando de que tuvieron que encontrar una solución diferente a lo que venían acostumbrados a hacer, que era imágenes prehechas, ¿no? O sea, vídeo prehecho.
And that basically means we take all the heavy work that usually happens in offline tools, and then we put it on a CPU and execute it at runtime. And when I heard that, I had absolutely no idea what the impact on performance is. That's why we should take a look what an animation rig is actually doing. So when an animator animates a face in Maya, then he doesn't animate every vertex or pixel individually. Instead, he's using a tool like this one. It's called a faceboard. And it has a set of sliders.
Dice que en vez de, o sea, un animador no va píxel a píxel animando las cosas, sino que utiliza la herramienta esa, ¿no? que está ahí poniendo.
It's actually moving a lot of little details around the eyes, like the eyelids, the eyelashes, the eyebrows, and it's also driving the wrinkle maps and the blend shapes around the eyes. So with a single slider, we can control all these microscopic details in a certain area of the face. And a faceboard is basically a simple UI for an animator.
No, esto está chulo,
and it's also the input system for the animation rig, which is always running in the background to make sure these little details in the face get a correct animation. And as long as all this happens in Maya, it's called offline rigging, because everything happens in an offline tool. And now, with runtime rigging, we decided to take this system and move it directly into the engine.
Vale, está diciendo que cogieron ese sistema y lo decidieron poner directamente en el motor y no tenían ni idea de lo que iba a suponer para el rendimiento.
And one of the problems with offline tools is you generate a lot of data, and then you need to store that data somewhere. And in our case, it was just convenient to bake the metadata for the blend shapes and the wrinkle maps directly into the joints. And if you need 402 joints only for the blend shapes,
Digamos que necesitaban un total de 599 puntos de unión de esos que utiliza el Mayan, ¿no? El programa este. Y que era una locura. Entonces intentaron meter esto en un sistema de almacenamiento, porque era cantidad de datos, en una especie de metadata. Transformaron esto en una especie de metadata, transformando eso en 179 en vez de 599.
And runtime rigs are also highly efficient animation compression system. So mainly because we don't need to store that much data. All we need are a set of 183 input parameters per keyframe. And that makes all animation files automatically 5 times shorter. So the data size went down by 80%. And this compression is lossless because now we can generate everything on the CPU at full floating point precision.
Vale, pues debido al 80% de reducción de datos, son capaces de hacerlo en una CPU sin problemas ahora mismo.
In 1 millisecond, and that's actually almost a double speed compared to offline rigging. And yes, we still need to do a lot more computations at runtime.
Nos dice que todavía necesitan trabajar más en el asunto, como todo lo que se hace en Star Citizen, claro.
Of course, some time to organize the rig data into a cache-friendly and compact format. And these numbers here are only for the animation update on the CPU. They do not include rendering or shading, but Andreas will talk more about this later. But I think 10 heads in 1 millisecond on an i7 is a really good number. But animations are not the only reason why we switch to runtime rigs. Another pretty big advantage is what we call runtime retargeting of animations. And in my opinion, that's the absolute killer feature. And here are some examples. Targeting means you can play that animation on every face model in the game, even on faces that look totally different. And it can be a simple
Vale, está hablando de que
the mood of the character. So if he's happy,
como digamos de hacer una especie de copy-paste, ¿vale? De lo que están haciendo. Utilizan algo y lo pueden copiar y reproducir en cualquier tipo de cara, independientemente de cómo esa cara sea. Teniendo la animation retargeting, que le llaman, ¿no?
So here you have Jax McCleary and Bellosa and some experiments I did. And it's the same face model on all these screens, but the performance is coming from different actors.
Está diciendo que es la misma cara en todas las escenas, pero el desarrollo de los gestos viene de diferentes actores.
The only option would be offline retargeting in Maya, and that means brute force data duplication in the engine. And if you have 120 unique faces in the game, then you can imagine how much data you need to duplicate. Yeah, and the next feature was also inspired by runtime rigs. And you know that, face over IP. And in this case, we record the voice and the facial animation of a player with his webcam. And then we convert that performance into facial controllers, which we send over the network. And then we
bueno, que no hay mucho que decir, ya lo estáis viendo, simplemente reconvierte lo que son los gestos de las personas en el juego.
We take advantage of two main features of runtime rigs. The first is the compression feature, because we want to send only a few input controllers over the internet. And the second is the retargeting feature, because we need to reconstruct the facial animation of a real player on his avatar, which might look totally different. And the next feature is called performance transformation or PCAP transformation. And with this feature, we basically try to modify an entire pre-recorded mocap scene at runtime. And this here is an original mocap scene without any procedural modifications.
Bueno, aquí lo que están hablando es que una escena ya prehecha la pueden remodificar con esto que hemos hablado del copy-paste, ¿no? De simplemente hacer que el personaje, realizando la misma acción, realizando la misma movida, tenga otro tipo de gestos.
But here it looks more like they are talking to an invisible person in the room. And a scene like this can only work if you watch it from exactly the same camera position it was captured for. But if that cutscene...
Hey, saludos a los chicos del hangar, hombre.
Saludos, chavales.
Bienvenidos.
Buenas. The player can be anywhere in the room and the camera is
muy buena, muy buena.
Position. So here we have the same scene again, but this time with PCAP transformation. And we still have only one animation per character. And one of the challenges we had to get right was the body language of the NPCs. So when Sito opens his arms and says, "Welcome to Stanton," then you expect him to turn around in his chair and really face the player. And that can be a challenge because the player can be anywhere in the room.
Vale, está hablando de que cuando el personaje llega y te da la bienvenida de bienvenido a Stanton o bienvenido a la estación, puede ser un reto por el hecho de que el personaje no siempre va a estar en el mismo lugar. Entonces, con este tipo de herramientas lo que haces es como orientar el personaje, como poder modificar hacia dónde apunta, porque partimos de la base de que en este caso es una escena pregrabada que ha tenido que ser modificada para que eso se pueda realizar.
And this is a feature we developed on our side, and then we combined it with runtime rigs. So all the features I just mentioned are a direct result of runtime rigging, but we have another one in development, and I hope this one sounds familiar because Freelateral presented a prototype last year at the GDC. And today we take a look at an updated version in our engine. And gene splicing means you have a database, which we call a DNA file. And in this DNA file, we have a couple of scanned heads. And each scanned head has a fully working rig logic to drive the facial animation on a character. And this database or DNA file is what you can call a gene pool.
Están hablando de la herramienta que utilizan para que el personaje mire directamente al jugador, ¿no?
So if you
y que lo vaya siguiendo.
All the heads in a database and average them, then you get this face. And that's how we generated the average Joe. And now we can take different features out of this database and build our own face. We start with the eyes, and we give him the eyes of his mother and the nose of his father. And I hope that's big enough. Okay. And then we can change the eyes, and they can be different on the left and the right side.
No, aquí no estoy traduciendo porque ya veis lo que está haciendo realmente.
Qué pasada, tío.
The left and the right side of the face can be totally different.
Que es así, tío. ¿Qué le vamos a hacer?
No, symmetric faces are officially over.
Vamos a ver, cada pedazo de ogro que no te lo crees ni tú.
Oye, pero si yo soy así, si yo tengo esa cara, ¿me vas a decir que no puedo jugar con mi cara?
Sí, pues con lo que tú quieras, pero la gente tiene muy mala leche, ya te lo
And then of course you can change the shape of the head, and with a little bit of tweaking and artistic skills, you can create a new face in a couple of seconds. It doesn't take that long. And that's pretty much the concept of gene splicing. You have this database with a couple of scanned heads. And then you say, I want the nose of that guy and the ears of the other guy. And Freelateral calls it shopping for face parts, because that's what it actually is. And the face is subdivided into these 12 regions, and for each region we can blend in multiple parts of different heads. So I think it's a simple system, but at the same time a really powerful system to generate new faces in no time. And maybe you noticed I'm throwing all these buzzwords around, like gene splicing.
Bueno, Harlock, si le anda con un palo en la cabeza hasta que se ha roto el palo, a lo mejor sí que se queda así.
DNA system. And when I heard these words the very first time, I had absolutely no idea what all this mumbo jumbo means, at least not in the context of character customization. So gene splicing, that's the buzzword for these 5 features.
Sí, tío, el Gandalf en esta edición es de la leche ya.
The skinning and the transformation rig of a character. And that's it. Now, if we change something on a head, then we need to regenerate all of them on the fly. And because this is still a bit mysterious, I will just show with a video what's really going on under the hood.
Bueno, nos va a enseñar que al modificar la cara hay ciertas cosas que tienen que cambiar también. Y va a enseñar un vídeo para saber qué es lo que ocurre detrás de todo.
But there is another little detail, and that's not so obvious. We can also change the geometry inside the head, like the shape of the eyes, the tongue, or the teeth.
Cosas como la mandíbula, la lengua o el tamaño de los ojos, el redondeo de los ojos tiene que cambiar según hagas las cosas.
Madre mía, qué grima, tío.
So, and then these green dots represent the bind pose of the character. These are the joints of the bind pose. And each character needs a bind pose. It defines how skeleton and mesh are connected. And the bind pose in general is static. You create it in Maya to bind the mesh, and then it stays like that. But here the mesh is morphing, which means we need to change it or update it as well. So these green dots need to be on the surface of the skin all the time, or the skinning will break. And the next feature is really hard to see if you don't know what to look for. Each character or each head has slightly different skin weights, and skin weights have a very big impact on the skinning. And the biggest impact is always around the eyes.
Olla, tío, vaya pasada.
We need to mix the skin weights as well. If we don't do that and they are not correct, then it can happen that the eyes do not close, or you get the opposite, they overclose, and then the eyelids intersect. And people pay a lot of attention to eyes, and if something is not right, they see it immediately.
Me están diciendo que toda la tecnología que están hablando de los puntos verdes y demás son los puntos de fijación que están interconectados, que a la hora de modificar una parte de la cara, pues está como, digamos, todo interconectado, y que uno de los puntos fuertes se ve en el tema de los ojos, que tienen que fijarse y que se vea correctamente porque la gente se fija mucho en lo que es los ojos y es lo primero que ve.
It's very subtle, and it needs to be subtle, because
este tío ahora mismo es súper expresivo, tío.
With joints, you can move only a group of vertices around, but for all these subtle details, high precision animations, it's a lot easier to work with.
Los dos, tío, o sea.
Está hablando de la precisión que tiene su sistema.
So, and then finally, we have the rig logic. And this feature is impossible to visualize. It's pure code with all the rules and heuristics. And the rig logic is like the puppet master behind the curtain. It controls just everything in a face. And for gene splicing, we need to mix the logical data of all these different rigs together, or the facial animations will not work. So here you can see I'm morphing between all these different heads while an animation is playing. And it doesn't matter how much the face is changing. The rig logic will always make sure you get the correct expression.
La verdad es que es flipante la adaptación, ¿eh? No apesta por ningún lado, quiero decir.
Es una burrada, una auténtica burrada, tío. Es genial.
Es impresionante.
Fijaros en los detalles del pelo, tío, que está todo pelado y cómo se ve eso.
And that are the 5 features of gene splicing.
No tengo ni idea en qué versión lo meterán, pero el día que podamos hacer algo así será exagerado.
We need to regenerate an entire facial rig from scratch, every frame. Of course, something like this needs to happen only in the customizer and only for one head. You don't need to do that in the game. So once you're done with customization, we bake everything into a static rig, and then it works like all the other heads we already have in the PTU. So with this system, we can generate every facial feature we want. And that means we have a procedural system to create an unlimited amount of new faces.
Bueno, están hablando de que gracias a este sistema, todo lo que nos han enseñado, que tienen un sistema procedural para crear todas las caras que quieran y con todos los gestos que ellos deseen en la cara, todas las opciones, ¿no?, disponibles para una cara.
Yeah, they either clip through the skin or are detached from the skin. And
el problema del que están hablando es eso, de qué pasa con el tema de la ropa, ¿no? Que no cuadra con el tamaño de la cabeza y con tal.
Hombre, es que a ver, si te vas a poner un casco y te va a salir la cabeza del casco, no jodas.
Madre mía, pero eso es como si te vas a comprar un bañador y tú tienes que usar una XL y te vas a pillar una S, ¿sabes?
Claro. Oye, pero mira, quédate de una cosa, tío. Parece que no, pero mira toda la cantidad de gafitas, de detalles que van saliendo, ¿eh?
Bueno, poco a poco, tío. Eso, en cuanto lo tengas...
La barba mola, ¿eh?
Sí,
El
está bien
pelo,
hecha, tío.
That helps a
es una
bit.
pasada.
So it's still far from perfect. You can see, look at the beard, it's still
Cuando ya tengan
clipping,
cuadrado
but it
toda la
helps
ropa
a
y no haya
little
movidas
bit,
raras, como que te
with
salga la
rigid
cresta a través
attachments
del
like
casco, ¿vale?
sunglasses and this officer
Va a ser
cap.
la hostia.
Because now the skull is static, but that means you can't change it anymore. And the only thing left for customization is now the mouth, the nose, and everything around the eyes. And that's better than nothing, but only
Madre
if
mía,
the
parece
face
un
is
oficial
directly in
ruso
front of
de
the
la Primera
camera.
Guerra Mundial.
If it's 2 or 3 meters away, then this
Pero ha dicho
feature
que de
is a
momento solo
lot
se va a poder
harder to see.
customizar, ¿no? La
La
nariz,
nariz,
almost invisible.
los
So,
ojos y la boca.
I mean, just look at the
Por
guy
el
in the
tema de que
distance, maybe you can
del
see
casco
that
se
the
sale
pixels on his
de
nose
las
are still
gorras y
morphing.
demás.
Sí.
O sea, del casco de la
Not enough
cabeza.
to
Digo.
say that this is a new face
El
or a
diseño de las
different
gorras,
head.
verdad que la gente no estaba
So
muy
skull
contenta, ¿no?
unification is a
Con las
compromise,
gorras
but a
esas.
bad
Bueno,
one.
la gorra es mejor que la que venden de merchandising.
So that was an example why skull unification is a bad idea.
Eso es verdad.
And here's another example why I think
No,
it's
esto no
an
es para la
absolutely horrible
3.3
idea
Metal
to
ya,
do.
esto más para más adelante.
We just ignore textures and facial hair
Es para
for
la
a moment
3.5.
and focus only on the silhouette of the original scanned
Que rima
heads.
con...
The silhouette
5.
alone has all the key elements we need to identify a face. And it actually seems that the silhouette has a much bigger impact on our perception than all the features on the front side of the face.
Pero
I know this
ya
sounds a bit counterintuitive, but
se hace
actually
todo
it's not.
más liviano, tío.
Silhouettes have a
Con un buen
very
parche, ¿sabes?
simple and clear image. They are
Sí, que
used
sí,
in
ya
any
verás
field.
cuando
Bueno, está
pille.
diciendo que las
Identify
siluetas de los
objects
personajes
very
realmente tienen
fast.
mucho más
That's
impacto
why
de lo
graphic
que
signs
se
are
piensa
using
originalmente.
silhouettes,
Y
because
ahí ve
you
las
can
diferentes y
identify
distintas
them in a
siluetas que
split
sí que
second
tienen
from
realmente un
far
impacto
away.
visual grande, ¿no?
And that's the
Hay
other good
muchas
thing with
diferencias.
silhouettes, the size and the distance doesn't matter that much. And if you look at all these heads, it's clear they all look different from every camera angle. And it's not the nose or the mouth or the eyes that makes them different. It's the shape of the head, and especially the size of the head relative to the body. That has a much bigger impact on our perception than all the features on the front side of the face. And with the skull unification, we just killed this feature.
Tiene que beber un vasito de agua el tío, si no va a reventar ahí.
If we cannot find a simple solution to combine attachments with the original scanned heads and keep the silhouettes as they are, then there's no practical reason to continue with gene splicing. If we don't get, how to say, more bang for the buck, then this is just a waste of CPU cycles. It's like rebuilding a clone army with a more complex technology. And that was the reason why things didn't move forward with gene splicing. That's why it's not in any PTU build. We just couldn't find a solution for the attachment problem.
Vale, está hablando de que todavía no han podido encontrar una solución para el tema de las gorras y demás, que ahora mismo solo sería como una especie de clones con última tecnología, pero que sería un desperdicio de CPU. Y ahora están diciendo de Star Citizen New Hope como dando a entender de que hay esperanza todavía. Y hasta ahora pues es el momento de por qué no se ha implementado en el juego, y es por eso, ¿no? Porque no tiene sentido implementar eso quedando todo como está, hecho un puto desastre.
¿Y las mujeres para cuándo? A ver, ¿para cuándo las mujeres?
Para la 3.4, tío, pero cuando saquen la mujer que le puedas poner tetas y cosas de esas, si no...
Normal, que puedes hacer cualquier juego de rol.
Sí, sí, normal, no quiero exageraciones.
Hombre, no, yo quiero exageraciones, ¿por qué no? Pero...
No,
pero
yo siempre al límite, yo al máximo, ¿sabes?
Claro,
pues en Fortnite ya viste la noticia, ¿no? Que le pusieron físicas a los pechos.
Vale, la elasticidad, ¿no? Una sensación de elasticidad, que es lo que pone ahí. Que esa es la solución.
Mira, con el calcetín en la cabeza y todo.
El saco del saco, ¿eh?
Sí,
sí, tío.
So this all seems to work.
Hostias, una
But
flipada.
there's one important thing to mention. What you see here.
El médico es una flipada, ¿eh?
Sí, flipa, ¿eh? Flipa,
so that they
tío.
move with the skin. This is a special case.
Sí, porque se le adapta el pañuelo bien, ¿sabes? No hace cosas raras.
Sí, no hace clipping, tío, que es lo que suele pasar en la mayoría.
Claro, el problema que tienen es con las gafas las cejas, mira.
Glasses and helmets. And you see it, it's a total deformation disaster.
Tío, son gafas adaptables, tío.
Here we have...
Voy a joderlo.
And here actually we have an additional challenge with the DNA system.
Todo adaptable.
guys, I need to stop the video. So here we have an additional challenge.
Qué bueno. No, pero mira, ese es el casco de minero. Eso te lo venden ahora mismo en Lepsky.
Pero se supone que, claro, eso mola, tío. Se supone que tú eres consciente de eso cuando tú deformas el cráneo de esa manera y el casco se mueve, pero si lo dejas en un momento dado, que no tienes que deformar, se adapta guay, tío.
Lo del casco es una flipada, como la cambian,
I'm morphing the left and the right side completely independently.
Madre
But the big
mía,
problem
muy
is now
pasado.
all the rigid attachments are now also asymmetric. And
Qué
you can see
grima,
the
tío, parece
problem on
Blandy
these
Blue.
metallic helmets, so these metallic parts, they are warping in all random direction, and it looks more like, how to say, rubber than metal. So in other words, it doesn't work at all, and that means always back to the drawing board. And a couple of weeks later, we started the next generation of wrap deformers. And if you look now at these sunglasses and this officer hat, you can see there is this subtle scaling. It's just enough to align the attachments with the shape of the head. But there's one detail that makes this a bit tricky. Some attachments have parts that are elastics and parts that are rigid. And we want the rigid parts to stay rigid, of course, and not bend like rubber. And we want the elastic parts, like this helmet harness around the neck, form with the geometry of the neck. And that means we need multiple deformation methods for the same attachment.
Vale, está diciendo que para un mismo objeto necesitan diferentes tipos de modificaciones. Pues hay objetos que tienen partes elásticas y parte que no. Y entonces ahí tuvieron que darle duro y volver a hacer movidas.
So here we are still doing experiments with different techniques. We are still trying to figure out what gives the best result. But what we are doing is
todavía están intentando descubrir cuál sería el mejor resultado combinando esas dos técnicas de rigidez y de elasticidad.
So we just apply some stretching and scaling to the parts of the helmets, if you pay attention here.
Hostia, el morro y tocando el cristal. ¿Qué vas a decir, Motoko, que se me...
No, digo que mola que te vayan metiendo en los diferentes procesos a los que han ido. Me voy encontrando este problema y luego la elasticidad, hasta llegar a esto, porque vas viendo realmente que conforme vas avanzando en la herramienta para realizar esto, te vas encontrando problemas inesperados.
Bueno, pues lo que ha dicho es que el resultado de lo que estamos viendo en el vídeo es algo que se puede llamar esperanza. Por eso pone a new hope, una nueva esperanza. Momento de la verdad. A ver.
Ahora cómo ha quedado será, ¿no?
So, and here we have Admiral Bishop again after some cosmetic shader improvements. And this model is still work in progress, but I think it's a really
este modelo sigue
model.
en progreso, o sea que no está finalizado.
What we have now is a face customization system based on gene splicing. And when we worked on this system, we had, of course, concerns that all the customized characters might look like second-class or low-budget characters, especially when you put them next to a T0 model and use the same camera and lighting. So what we have here is just a simple test to see how the gene spliced heads can keep up with an original head in terms of animation and visuals. And Bishop is the only one created by an artist, and the rest is what we call programmer art. There is no model on disk that looks like this. We created all of them with gene splicing, and we just took the most extreme features in one phase and combined it with features of another phase.
El único creado a nivel artístico es el del medio y el resto son creados mediante programación, son artificiales.
Some random attachments we found in the build, that's why they
Qué
look really
calidad
funny.
impresionante,
But
tío.
as you can see, all the skin attachments work without clipping, no matter if rigid or elastic. So now, if we take all these heads and put them next to each other and compare them with a T0 with an artist-created model, then I think it's not really obvious that all these 8 heads around Bishop are created by a user with a customizer. So I know it's a bit hard to compare the animation of 8 heads while they are playing at the same time, but this will be on YouTube in a couple of hours or a couple of days, I don't know. But then you can pause the video and compare every single frame if you want.
El casco de arriba
every
es flipante,
and
con
you
la
will see
cámara.
every micro expression. Every emotion is absolutely identical on all these heads.
Está diciendo que podéis compararlo después en el vídeo de YouTube que os subirán de la CitizenCon cuando lo subí en Star Citizen, y que podréis comprobar cada frame, cada segundo, y comparar que los gestos son idénticos en cada una de las caras, las emociones, que están animadas de la misma manera, pero que lucen diferente, pues tienen una base diferente. Y que notaréis las microexpresiones tanto en el personaje que está prediseñado como en el resto, ¿no?
Pero si esos son personajes aleatorios, una burrada, ¿eh?
Sí, son aleatorios. Sí. O sea, no es que sean aleatorios, son creados por ellos, ¿no? De forma artificial, sin base.
Sí, sí. Que el único que tiene base es el Gary Oldman, el resto...
And in all this example here, I'm using always the same animation, only one animation. And I think the runtime rigs are doing a pretty good job with the retargeting. And especially this case here, especially in combination with gene splicing, that's the absolute hardcore test for animation retargeting, because we can generate millions of faces. And honestly, I have no idea what else we need to do to create a test case that's crazier than this one. And maybe you're wondering about these strange numbers on the screen. That's what we call the DNA matrix. And there are always 48 numbers in that DNA matrix. That's the input parameters for the gene splicing system.
Vale, lo que tenéis a la izquierda es los inputs que hace que la cara se comporte como se comporta. O sea, todo eso es información del programa. Son datos de cómo tiene que estar colocada cada cosa, cada movida, cada historia. Toda esa barbaridad es la DNA Matrix.
And every time the head is changing, the numbers change as well. But it's actually the other way around. That matrix defines how the face looks. So when you customize,
todos los números que están ahí son las métricas que definen el resultado, o sea, que es el reflejo de la cara, de cómo se está moviendo, son las métricas que están ahí, ¿no?
Yeah, and this is also the end of my part about gene splicing. Thanks for coming.
Vale, ya acabo de tal. La verdad es que el tío se lo ha currado, parecía paradito y tal, pero dentro de lo que cabe se lo ha currado la presentación, ¿no?
Sí, ha molado mucho, tío.
So, next we have Andreas on stage. So my part was more about runtime rigging, and he will give you a lot more details about gene splicing.
Esto también es todo muy técnico y tal, pero al menos está muy ameno,
warm welcome to
Andreas. Bueno, este nos ha hecho un resumen general y ahora nos van a pillar un hacha y nos van a abrir la cabeza en dos para meternos el resto de todo, o sea, todo el resto con detalle, pero Dios, es muy duro, ¿eh? A mí se me hace duro, chicos.
Sí, sí, lo... Yo, sintiéndolo mucho en el alma, me tengo que retirar. Que me tengo que llevar a los críos al colegio.
Venga,
me vas a perder lo mejor, tío.
Tío, no me rayes que no me voy a dormir y mañana voy a ser un puto zombie.
Tira. Que mañana tienes que estar aquí a full.
Sí, tío, por eso. Pues nada, gente, buenas noches a todos, un placer.
Even more under the hood stuff, and I'll also try to explain to you why this feature is so important in the context of our game. So it's really so important, has such a big impact, because in Star Citizen we don't have a limited play space. We have
voy a por otro café, tío. Con este tostón que nos van a meter no llego, tío, a la cama.
Bueno, yo necesito hacer una mini paradita para reabastecimiento también, señores. Vengo ahora.
Venga, tío. Yo sigo por aquí.
Through animation, you interact with them through their face. Yeah, so that's why we don't have any background characters in our game. As Ivo has told you, like, we have these different tiers of facial rigs, but in theory, like, whether it's player-generated animation through face over IP, or whether it's animation that from mission givers, for instance, or gameplay story cinematics, as we call them, they all need to be at a similar level, and when these characters are standing next to each other, it shouldn't be obvious which is which. In order to do that, there could be several approaches. First, we could ask Trilateral to just generate 10,000 rigs for us, or maybe 100,000. That should be sufficient, so you don't meet any duplicate characters in the verse. But I think it wouldn't be money particularly well spent, and that's your guys' money, so we needed a cost-efficient solution, and that's a procedural solution for generating these faces. The paramount thing for us was that the player was able to customize their face at a very
ya estoy por aquí.
With infinite variety and customizability. But it's also very important for ourselves as developers. Our lore guys come up with all these interesting characters that have their backstory.
Bueno, está hablando ahí de que el jugador debe poder personalizar su personaje. Los desarrolladores deben de poder crear nuevas caras para los NPCs. Caras personalizadas no deben de parecer no realistas o genéricas. Dice que también no tiene un personaje del que partir. Necesitan una solución que sea eficiente de coste, o sea, que no sea una burrada. Encajar en un universo con humanos digitales únicos y de alta calidad. Eso es lo que dice ahí, ¿no? Es una sobrada. Es una sobrada, Rangosón. Sí, pero a ver, es inevitable. Con lo que dura la presentación tenemos que comer mientras tanto, tío, y algo, porque son muchas horas, ¿eh? Son muchas horas, chicos.
Sí, a ver, ¿eh?
Ya lo dijo Iván, tío, hoy es un día guarro. Pizza, Doritos, patatas. Todo lo mejor. Gracias, Riker. Yo me voy a comer una ensalada, tío. De estas que te vienen ya preparadas, ¿eh? Todo guarro ahí.
And we lose a lot of the characteristics that the actual real people had that originally were scanned in. So it was a valid first step for Star Citizen, and it gave you something that you could play with, something new. And yeah, it's iterative development, it's normal, but it's definitely not sufficient for Star Citizen, and that's why we went a step further and yeah, tried our best to solve all these problems and get gene splicing working. While Gene Splicer is a very powerful technological foundation, it's important to say that the system
Bueno, decir que ahora están diciendo muchas cosas técnicas y tal, y aprovecho para repetir otra vez que agradezco un montón el apoyo que nos dais. Y que la verdad es que es una pasada estar en un canal de YouTube con el señor Motoko y el señor Iván. La verdad es que se disfruta un montón, tío.
Y con todo que nos reímos mucho, tío. Joder.
Experiencia súper recomendable, tío. Sí, sí.
Game film hybrid, there's a certain bias in terms of what faces you see there and what characters you see there. So most of them are male, obviously. In terms of age, they're probably 25 to maybe mid 40s. Most of them are fit military types because they serve on some spaceship carriers. So it's not like a proper representation of the population. And in order to do that,
están hablando del género, tío. Aquí, a partir de aquí, es donde se definirán. Mira, ya van por buen camino. Caucasian, europeo, africano, tal. Para tener esclavos ya voy a tener variedad, ¿sabes? Bueno, pues los de estos aquí, los de estos allá. Ah, claro, tío. ¿Qué quieres? ¿Qué necesitas? Voy ahí a la base de datos, tío, y digo, oye, mira.
Yeah, then there's physical constitution, which is also like visible. Otro que parece que tu post está teniendo resultados.
Ah, sí, tío, no lo he mirado. Mola, mola.
We want to have all these things covered.
En verdad te lo mereces, Motoko, que me cago en la puta, tío. ¿Cuándo te lo has pillado? ¿En qué año, tío?
Yo qué sé, tío. Pero desde que salió, creo que dije, esta me mola, tío.
O sea, ¿cuánto van?
Tienen que ir por lo menos 4 o 5 años desde que salió, ¿eh?
Telita, ¿eh? Y luego te sacan una Hammerhead y al año para afuera, ¿eh?
Ya ves, tío. Pero bueno, entre más tarde, yo lo digo siempre, entre más tarde en realidad, pues mejor saldrá, más actualizada.
O sea, no es que no estén pixelando, es que te están mostrando la malla de lo que sería la whitebox, el concepto limpio de base, de cómo sería definir los diferentes tipos de raza que pueda haber, ¿no? Pues si el tío es africano, si el tío es europeo, si el tío es indioamericano, si el tío es, ¿sabes? Pues así.
Mira, tío.
¿Qué cojones?
Eso es el Predator, tío. El Predator, tío. Así es como se va a vestir la peña en el 890, tal cual.
Claro, tío.
So while Gene Splicer is a very powerful technological foundation done by
Vaya jugada la Hammerhead.
it's important to point out that
¿En qué sentido, Iván?
Si tenéis alguna duda, preguntadla por el chat que intentaré resolverla de lo que están mostrando, porque estoy comiendo una ensalada y está muy buena ahora mismo.
En el sentido económico, que ha sido una buena inversión.
Sí.
Han subido
Star Citizen.
No, la Hammer. Le han subido $75.
Sí. Yo ya te lo dije, tío, hace tiempo. Y recordad que tenéis el tutorial ahí que os indica la mandanga. Tutorial que hemos hecho entre Mr. Iván y yo ahí.
That finally convinced the guys to pursue this approach in the engine. Maybe like the fact that we could even apply beards to females convinced them in the engine.
Gracias, Levitante, tío.
All right, so another thing that we needed to solve, you may not be aware of, in games, typically, like every asset that you see doesn't exist in just one version. So, for instance,
la verdad es que va a molar el Hearthstone ver con los thumbnails, tío, dándole caña por los senderos.
Sí, tío.
And depending on the distance of an object to the camera or to you, and on maybe the system specs, whether you have a fast machine or a slow machine, the most appropriate one of these meshes gets picked. And with the gene splicing system and our attachment system having to adapt these meshes at runtime,
bueno, entonces,
to make sure that's also supported. It also supports this level of detail, LOD system.
¿Creéis que van a enseñar algo más de asunto o no?
When your character traverses,
yo creo que deberían. Deberían de finalizar con algo tocho, creo yo, ¿eh?
Una cosa, informo que hay una Mustang especial que se llama Vindicator.
Sí.
Es de la CitizenCon.
Solo tiene una ¿cómo se llama? Una skin.
Pero es de dinero fresco todo, ¿no?
No, esta no. Así que igual un CCU así, por si acaso. De Aurora a esta no es lo peor, ¿eh? Cuidado.
But it's not only about like creating these runtime rigs.
Vamos a revisar aquí.
When you traverse through the level, it's also, even if you're static and standing still and all the other characters were standing still, you still need to render them efficiently. And because now with the system, we're able to have maximum variety and no duplicate characters, we'll probably want to put more in the game, so we have to render more. And our rendering tech needs to keep up with that. And our deformation tech as well, which is closely related.
A ver, vamos a ver qué hay por aquí.
So the next slide, or the next clip, I need to give you a little warning, because when I started...
O sea, esto viene siendo la Valkyria nueva, ¿no? Que esto sería con... Pero esto es de pagar a tocateja.
Sí.
Sí. W, guardo.
And it's really slow, but there's a very good reason for that.
Te viene con el sample
so this is
TR y tal.
That I procedurally generated of 100 characters. And as I said, normally this LOD system makes sure that the ones farther away get rendered at a lower resolution in order to not have as much load on the CPU or GPU. Now in this case, I need to go back. In this case, I forced what we call the lot 0, which is the highest resolution mesh, intentionally in order to like stress test the system and really hammer the CPU. And that's because like, especially like this LOD 0 of the faces was traditionally, for technical reasons, in our game or in our game engine, was always computed on
Confirmo, no hay
the CPU. And data had to be sent to the GPU, and that's always a bad thing. That's always a bottleneck. And we wanted to get rid of that eventually anyway, even independent of gene splicing and the DNA system. But because we had to overhaul our deformation system in order to make this attachment adaptation work, we had to do that anyway. So we thought, okay, that's a good opportunity to kind of kill two birds with one stone. So one of our core engine programmers in Frankfurt, Andrei Pivnenko, he went ahead and implemented a GPU solution for deformation also on our lot zeros. So we're going to use that across the board at some point. So this solution is based on compute shaders that are currently running on DirectX 11.
Pregunta Rango-san si PTU para todos o solo consigue y suscriptores. Pues mira, Rango-san, ellos han dicho, o sea, Chris Robert ha dicho en la TV de que sería for all backers. Es decir, for all backers significa que es para todos los para toda la gente que apoya. Lo que pasa es que hasta que realmente veamos el último capi de esta CitizenCon, que es el Road to Release, el camino a la liberación, no vamos a saber si es para todos o es solo para conseguir o suscriptores. Yo espero que la liberen para todo el mundo, la verdad.
And while you'll not have like frame rate improvements overall in the game just because of that, in a real world scenario, these will have like a way less impact. Like normally in terms of optimization, it's like every little bit helps, you know. There's the millisecond here and 2 milliseconds there, and our core engine programmers, they often fight really hard for this stuff, and then tech artists come in and just double the polygon count, and then that optimization is gone again. So yeah, another thing we did, in particular,
bueno, lo confirmo, la muestra especial de la CitizenCon se puede pillar con esto, con estos
Vale. Y solo está a la venta la Valkyria, ¿no? Deben haber nuevas.
Sí.
Bueno, y la Hammerhead y la Carrack.
La Carrack no, tío.
With loading times and with like your minimum frame rate. So it's quite important for a good
este mes el regalo de suscriptores es Armor.
As I told you, even we as developers are going to be.
O sea que lo van haciendo poco a poco, ¿no? Pero bueno, aún así, si tú te suscribes y te suscribes cuando esté la armadura completa, puedes comprar cada parte individualmente, ¿no?
Sí. Tú si te suscribes puedes, siendo suscriptor, puedes acceder a la tienda y comprar todo.
Que realmente si lo que quieres es la armadura, os compensa, porque creo que son 4,50 cada objeto, cada armadura, ¿no? Cada pieza. Menos, pues no compensa para nada, o sea, pillas la suscripción ahora, ¿no? Si lo que quieres es la armadura, digo.
No, a ver, al final, si quieres objetos de suscriptor, en realidad te sale más rentable. Una vez al año te suscribes y pillas todos los objetos.
Claro.
Por ejemplo, el RSI Venture, el Undersuite.
Bueno, o sea, puedes suscribirte una vez al año, no. Puedes suscribirte el último año de suscripción y lo compras todo.
También. Los trajes valen, por ejemplo, 1,50 solo.
Cada pieza.
Sí, bueno, el Undersuite. Luego cada pieza cuesta distinto.
So one of the kind of neat features is this randomized functionality, which you can use, which assigns random numbers, and that gives you like a starting point, and if you like that, you can go from there and improve your face further.
El casco cuesta 2 euros,
we're also able to assign
luego las chaquetas cuestan 2,50.
in this
¿Qué
customizer.
más tenemos?
That's quite useful for debugging. and seeing how the face reacts, how the attachments react to the various shapes. Okay.
Esto todo está muy bien, pero ya se está pareciendo al Yes Joan este de Nvidia, tío.
Sí, no, es que
empieza a meter ahí el asunto, te empieza a meter la matraca, tío.
We started like very early days of
Mira lo que dice Neo, sin Citizen.
As I said, it is informed by the internal one, and so yeah, one step after the next.
¿Qué
Our
pasa?
gameplay feature teams is also soon going to start implementing the persistence feature, so these
Menos mal que tenemos el café, el ETI
tiny
este,
values that make up the entire
de la cafetera fantástica.
they need to be stored
El Crash Coffee.
El Crash Coffee.
done with your customization. You don't want to lose that. And then they will need to be transferred over the network. So the guys, like your fellow players that see you, meet you somewhere in the verse, they see the face that you customized. Yeah, we also need to port all the existing attachments that we already have in the game to this new system. It's just a matter of...
Están hablando de lo mismo que habló al principio el primero que presentó todo, pero lo están desglosando y es más de lo mismo, tienen que aplicar esta tecnología para esto, tienen que hacer esto para aquello, o sea, son datos técnicos que la verdad a mí como persona que le gusta jugar, aunque sí me gustan las tecnologías, son muy densos y sobre todo a las 3 de la mañana que estamos aquí en España.
Claro.
In 3.5. When it does come, it should come with female heads, because by the time we should have females in the game in general. And yeah.
Está hablando de los personajes femeninos.
It's going to be exciting. Yeah, then the first iteration probably won't have this full gene pool of 50, 60 heads to choose from, but there will be probably 12 or 16. So you'll have like a lot of variety to choose from.
Dice que las mujeres tendréis como de 12 a 16 variedades para poder pillar. Que no habrá tanto como de varón de momento, pero bueno, que ya se implementará en el futuro. Aunque en realidad el tema de la ropa que tenían con el personaje femenino, con el tema de la elasticidad lo han debido de poder corregir o adaptar de alguna manera.
Yeah, so that brings me to the end of my sub-part of our joint presentation. Special thanks goes out to all these individuals listed for either contributing to the implementation of this feature and also to helping out with the content for the presentations. Special thanks, of course, to Trilateral for the amazing gene splicing system and their great collaboration while implementing this into our game engine. And biggest thanks of all to you guys out there for supporting us, for hanging in there.
En el roadmap
last year's
pone como que ya está,
myself, I was the backer since 2012.
Aston, tío.
I still, so like from your perspective, now I'm here. It's amazing to have your support, and when we go through these hard.
Bueno, la verdad es que valoro que nos muestren todo esto, pero yo entiendo que quizás no es la plataforma adecuada para hacerlo. Mira la cara de Discolando, chaval.
Hostia, suspirando y todo.
Some of that DNA splicing, some of the gene stuff, some of that helmet attachment, but all together, wasn't that amazing? Are you okay, Jared?
Yeah, I've seen.
Verdades como puños, señor Discolando.
I think Jared might be a
Está el
little
pavo dormido, tío.
shocked
Me cago en la
from
puta.
that last presentation. Like when you see that tech being taken to that level, it kind of makes you appreciate Star Citizen as a whole, as a project. And
A ver, es impresionante, o sea, realmente es impresionante. Es la hostia, tío. Es la hostia. Se hace pesado de ver porque son muchísimos datos técnicos, la información es muy densa, pero es la jodida hostia.
Yeah. Okay, that's the kind of stuff that rejuvenates me. We have got Tyler and
El Discolando está viendo bichos todavía.
El Discolando ha dicho, sí, esa es la clase de información que me rejuvenece.
Hey everyone, Tyler Whitkin here. I'm in the
Qué trolaco que es.
The mocap setup, which we're going to talk about in a second. But before we get into that, let's introduce somebody who, honestly, you probably don't need an introduction, but just in case somebody doesn't know who you are, tell them who you are and what you do for Cloud Imperium Games.
Hello everybody, my name is Brian Brewer. I'm lead animator here in ATX.
Now, obviously, this isn't normal. Our mocap setup is remote.
Bueno, dice que es el líder de animación en Cloud Imperium Games.
Hold an emote contest and shoot live motion capture here on stage today here at CitizenCon. In fact, we had a whole presentation where we took motion that we shot live, cleaned it, edited it, and actually got it running in game. And I don't know if you can see behind us here.
Yeah, we can step back a little bit. You guys can
move with us, I might even be able to get Travis to push play on the emote here or the dance.
Oh, thanks,
we actually
Travis.
did a dance.
So right now we're where it was going down. This is where the actors were performing. In this, I guess there's a square on the ground. What are the lines on the floor?
Well, so the blue lines are on the floor. That's called our capture volume.
Okay.
These yellow lines on the floor, we were showing what a metric is, and our actors have to hit certain marks on the floor.
No, está hablando de lo que utilizan para los actores para poder recrear el movimiento. Entonces, el actor se pone en el medio.
It actually went quite well. I was surprised at the large crowd that we had gathered around our booth today.
Well, of course. I mean, this is a look into game development that people don't normally get to see. So, how many emotes do you think you guys recorded today, if you had to guess?
Oh, I would say probably around maybe 30 different emotes. Of course, we took multiple takes and that sort of thing. It went beyond emotes too, because we had some great ideas from our fans, our winners of the emote contest, and I think it's going to be there's going to be a little something special for us in store.
La siguiente presentación, chicos, tiene pinta de ser algo más amena que esta. Pues es el tema del arte del espacio, el contenido visual del espacio, la creación visual. Entonces, quizás sea algo más ameno de ver. Solo nos queda el Crafting Space y pasada una horita, es decir, faltan 3 minutos, en teoría para que empiece, pasada una horita, es el Road to Release. Así que esperemos que en torno a las 4:30 de la mañana estemos jugando a Star Citizen.
Yo estaré sobado, tío.
Yo le estaré dando durísimo. Yo le estaré dando durísimo, tío. Mi nivel de enfermedad llega a esos límites ahora mismo.
Yo aguantaré lo que pueda, pero no me queda mucho, ¿eh? Ya uno se hace viejo, tío.
Es normal, chicos.
Currar zombie perdido es cosa mala.
No, eso no debéis hacerlo. Aparte de que hacer un directo cansa mucho, ¿eh? Parece que no, pero como tienes que estar pendiente de muchas cosas, cansa un poquito. O sea, desgasta un poco más que si lo estuviéramos viendo de normal.
Right now, looks like we're going straight back in, guys. Back to the action. Thanks, guys.
We've got. I'm sorry. Sean Tracer was telling
En la web está el folleto de la CitizenCon, tío. Se puede ver. Que narras dentro de la Kraken, te bajas el rollo y lo puedes ver, tío. Está muy bien.
Ah, sí.
We were watching Twitch chat during the thing, and I can't quote anything they said without setting off a profanity filter.
What's it like to be working on this stuff for so long to finally be able to get out there and show it?
Very satisfying, I would say, yeah. I mean, it's been hard at times.
Bueno, que sepáis que yo le voy a echar pelotas de verdad y mientras esté jugando a la 3.3 y la esté probando, la voy a streamear, Ahí con un par de pelotas. Streaming fresquito.
How rare is that to like cancel a project to find new hope and continue on?
It happens all the time that you run into a very serious problem and then it just doesn't make any practical sense to continue. And then a new technology comes along or someone has a new idea to combine it with someone else or restructure the feature, then you can just continue.
Algo así, Metal Gear, algo así voy a hacer.
What kind of timetable are we looking at? This isn't a 3.3 feature. This isn't a 3.4 feature. Do we have just a ballpark idea?
Ah, pero si sale la 3.3 sí que os mostraré la 3.3 en cuanto pueda. O sea, en cuanto pueda, lanzo.
3.5, so that's quarter 1, 2019.
Exactly.
Cool. What else we got?
I mean, speaking of someone who's like gets sucked into character creators for days,
yes.
Thank you so much for this. And as in the narrative department, being able to create all these characters, it's going to be amazing.
The interesting thing is one of our engine developers or senior tools developers, Sasha Hoba, is actually my lead. He created this this internal customizer, and I gave him feedback a little bit on it. And always, whenever I came to my desk, I found him playing with this thing and with a smile on his face. And he's like one of those techie guys where you wouldn't necessarily expect that. So that just goes to show that this is going to be a feature that players are going to appreciate a lot.
Now, just to ask, with the asymmetrical, like, has there been any...
Bueno, después del evento, los que queráis y aguantéis, os venís al Discord si queréis y nos vamos todos en la Caterpillar a tomar por culo, a ver el Trackstop, a ver todo lo que haya. Nos vamos de fiestuki por ahí, para celebrar la CitizenCon. Si queréis, ¿eh?
They are already asymmetrical, per se.
Elephant Man. So, I mean, if you just take the nose of one guy and put it on a different face, it sometimes creates an absolutely funny result.
All right, let's go back to Sandy, guys.
Well, thank you so much for being back.
So the next panel is Craft Space, creating the visuals of the verse.
Vale, vamos a... Os voy a poner el enlace del siguiente directo, chicos, y hacemos el cambio.
Venga, vamos para allá.
Vamos para allá. Ahí tenéis el enlace. Cerramos esto rápidamente y nos vamos para el otro.